Again, this is Judy McAllister. She is a long-term integral member of the Findhorn Foundation. She also was very integral, very involved in the development of the transformation game throughout the years, and continues to have that be a focus in her life as a trainer and organizing games and participating and leading people through the process. And Judy's also written a book called Forest Voices, When Nature Speaks, about her deeper connection with the nature kingdom. So Judy, welcome.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, so tell us, how'd you get to Findhorn? What drew you here? How'd you find out about it?
Yeah. I first heard about Findhorn back in the mid-70s. I was homesteading on a farm in Canada, and someone gave me a book called Secret Life of Plants. And there was a chapter in there about this place called Findhorn where they talked to plants and, you know, did weird and wonderful things. But it sparked my curiosity. It was like, well, that sounds interesting. And then a couple of years later, I was getting ready to come and do some traveling in Europe. And literally in the airport, I found a book called The Magic of Findhorn. And I remembered that name, Findhorn. So I read the book. I felt less attracted having read that particular book. But nevertheless, I was curious. Yeah. I think really it was curiosity and intuition. Because it just felt like, oh, this is something I want to find out more about. So, you know, I came for a visit thinking I was going to stay for 2 weeks. That was 42 years ago now. So,
oh my.
These things happen. It's not an uncommon story, really. But
so, did you stay on from that 2 weeks,
or
did you? You never went home. I mean, not never.
Not really. I mean, I went home back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I went home to let family know that I wasn't coming back to the life that I had kind of like laid out in front of me, and to undo some of what had been laid out in front of me. But that was only for a matter of a few weeks. And
what sustained you through that process inside yourself, Judy, of making such a astounding move at such a young age as well?
It was just it was just knowing. It was kind of like a cellular impetus of it was imperative that I did this thing. There was no questioning it. There was no doubt. I just knew. It was just as simple as that. I just knew. I didn't know how I knew. I just knew. And I had to follow it. There was no way I could have not followed it and felt like and stayed connected to myself somehow.
I think that's a remarkable insight, staying connected to yourself.
Yeah,
and throughout your path here at Findhorn, what sort of things have stood out for you as being things that have spurred your growth inside, or created a new worldview of some sort, or expanded?
How long is the list? I would have to. Okay, so I would have to say, working with the game of transformation, meeting the game Deva, and meeting that circle of people who were highly creative, very intuitive, very intent upon spiritual inquiry, and the way in which those things kind of like built into the structure of what the game is. So that's a big one. Working my way through early David Spangler, some of his work around the cosmic Christ, and kind of like the place of Findhorn in a world of transformation. That was another impetus, another kind of thread. And he continues to inspire me now with the way that he can articulate things and put perspectives on things that just keep my way of looking at life expanding. And then there's just my own experiences that thing of, I know I need to say yes to, and then there's something in front of me that I say yes to, and then that provides all the lessons. That whole thing of life is the classroom. All you have to do is pay attention to what's the lesson that's being put in front of you, and work with that and say yes to that. And then that takes you the next step. So eventually that led to, becoming focaliser of the foundation. It led to meeting Dorothy. It led to working with Dorothy. It led to doing workshops. God's idea of a joke continued to unfold, as I would say.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So you really followed a deep stream inside yourself.
In hindsight, I guess so. Yeah, that's how. I mean, that's
Yeah.
I can see that now. At the time, it was just, well, isn't it obvious that this is the next thing? This is the next thing. It just seemed the obvious thing to do, whatever came next, kind of thing.
So, Judy, you mentioned that, and I do want to sort of go back into there a little bit deeper, but that you at one point were the focalizer of the foundation. Today we call it lead steward, but
Right.
at that point we called it the focalizer of the foundation, and that's quite a that's quite a pinnacle peak there related to energetically what comes into the foundation. What at that point do you think was coming into the foundation that you were focalizing? Do you have any, does that bring anything up for you?
Good grief, Kathy.
Yeah.
Different things at different levels. I mean, I think at a kind of like structural level and at a organizational level, the foundation was, I mean, I stepped into a management group that was only men. I stepped into.
And what year was this, Judy?
This would have been 1992.
Okay. Just so we have.
And that put me on the board of directors for New Findhorn Directions, the trading arm. And that was all men as well. It was a time when there was still a lot of stress and tension in terms of what's foundation and what's community and where are the boundaries and what are the rights and privileges and responsibilities depending on where you sit in it all. And we were trying to do everything by consensus. We had a lot of very slow, laborious, difficult decision-making processes because we were constantly looking for consensus, not loyal minorities, but literally consensus. So, that made things difficult. So the first couple of years were really around working with changing some of the decision-making structures, working with community meetings, doing all of that kind of stuff, working more with outreach in the local community, building relationships there. On an inner level, the impulse was more around accountability, responsibility, alignment, how to, and there were financial pressures and stresses as well in all of that. But from an inner level, it felt like how to have the core continue to be reflected in all of the outer workings, in all of the structures and stuff, how to sustain that.
Like the essence of the foundation?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by the core?
The basic principles and the essence of the attitudes, the ethos. Because there was a lot of diversification going on then. And it's like, what created the cohesion? Well, the spirit had to create the cohesion, the engagement with the basic principles. That had to be the thing that would keep us glued together, kind of thing. So, yeah, I don't know if that's making sense.
What today? How does that? Is it reflecting today in where we are as a foundation? That you can see any sort of echoes from that time playing through, or
I can see echoes. I mean, I think that one of the advantages of having been around for a long time is you do see the cycles. You see the turns of the spiral. But some of the basic lessons or some of the basic curriculum, I guess, it's like if this this is a mystery school, so there's got to be a set curriculum. And how you go through that curriculum, or the order in which you go through the curriculum, is going to change. But the curriculum is pretty constant. And so, I constantly see echoes and reflections of, and I can go in my head, okay, so that's a turn of the spiral from that one or that one or that one. Sometimes that's helpful, and other times it's just crazy making.
So Judy, you mentioned three things that, at that time were surfacing as the learning process. One was accountability, the other was responsibility.
Yep.
And then you also said alignment.
Yeah.
Can you flush that out for us?
I think as we've grown, as we've matured, as we've moved away, it's like the more the body of the place takes up the responsibility, the more the body of the place needs to grapple or wrestle with, and how am I held accountable? Who holds me accountable? How do I hold myself accountable? To what am I accountable? Never mind to whom. And if I suppose my high dream would be that we individually and collectively were able to hold ourselves to account to that inner alignment, to that
Is that
point.
like okay, so that's the inner alignment is cultivated by the three principles, but in relation to the planetary purpose of the foundation, what would you say, how does it rise up?
For me, it's always risen around how do I play my part? That it's like the place was called into being for a reason. It has a purpose. It has a mission. That mission is not accomplished as far as I can see. When I look at the state of the world, we have not accomplished the mission. We are accomplishing it. But it's like, how do I play my part in the unfolding of that? People come, people go, some people stay longer. We all have different parts to play in that process. And I think continually asking ourselves, what's my part now? Do I still have a part now? And if I do, what is it? And then how do I play that out? How do I take responsibility for what I'm perceiving is my part, and bringing that into action, putting that into implementing it, basically. It's not so different than what they did in the early days. You listen, you ask, there's a response, and then the responsibility is to act on it. That's, to try to bring it to fruition, to try and make it real in the world. Whatever that is. And it's going to be different things for different people. That's the whole point, I think. Yeah. And then how does that align with mission and vision in an organization? Which is always going to be a challenge, I think.
Yeah, particularly interpreted into a spiritual context.
Absolutely, because that lays all kinds of, I think the listening and the trying to follow, that is the spiritual principle. Then how do you create forms that allow that principle to be made manifest in the world? How do you weave the legislation and the finances and the responsibilities to Her Majesty's government and the Home Office and all those things? How do you weave all that together and still stay true to whatever that inner impulse or inner alignment is calling forth?
And I think that actually points to the high level of practice that's here, that comes from the body of the coworkers and volunteers in the surrounding community. That in a sense is our is something essential. It
is. And one of the things that I love about the place is the diversity of how people do that. How they do the listening, how they try to enact it, the conversations that can happen around intuition or will or guidance or, all those things. The experiment is still ongoing. I don't know if it will ever stop being an experiment, because it feels like that's part of why Findhorn is here, is to be that experiment, to be that laboratory where new things can be tried out. And sometimes I when I do workshops and stuff, people ask me about what I've learned and how I've learned it. And often then where I need to go is into the mistakes, because people think, oh, it's all perfect and beautiful and lovely. And, it's not. It's like people used to say, you don't come to Findhorn to get away from the world. It's all here. But it's how do we work with it in a way that might be a little different.
Yeah, because it's very close up to live in a community that is, yeah. So Judy, I do want to ask you about Findhorn's contribution to the world today, but before I do that, just letting you know that's coming.
All right.
Please talk about your connection with nature and the book you wrote and how that evolved, and yeah, please.
Well, I think, see, this is where my introverted nature kind of gets in my way, Kath.
Okay.
I've always, when I was a kid, I had an affinity for trees. I liked to be around trees and in forests, and that continued through my teens. And when I was homesteading, we had 100 acres and I had 40 acres of forest. And I had some, 200-year-old oaks and all of that kind of thing. So my relationship with trees continued. And I learned how to garden from scratch because we bought this farm and I didn't know anything about growing food or gardens or anything. So, I learned by doing. And I loved it.
Who's we, Judy? Is that?
Myself and my then partner.
Okay.
And when I think that was why when I read Secret Life of Plants, I so loved that chapter about Findhorn. Because it felt like, okay, there's something here. There's something here that feels right. So when I got here, it was all of the ideas were all new. It wasn't like I'd been into this stuff before I got here, particularly, but everything felt right. And I would often find myself going, that's true. I already knew that, but I didn't know that I knew that, which again is quite a common experience when people come here. And it feels like the something in the field awakened me. And then we used to go to Randolph's Leap, which is this place where there's wonderful big trees. And so it just kind of grew. And then, of course, eventually, many, many years later, I started to work with Dorothy. And I already had an interconnection with certain levels of inner worlds.
So this is Dorothy McLean.
Dorothy McLean.
One of the one of the founders.
One of our three founders.
Yeah.
And I started to work with her and encouraged her to come back and start teaching more in the community, because she was teaching all around the world and she'd come back once a year and do a workshop, but she wasn't really teaching in the community. And she turned that round on me and said, well, I'll do that, but only if you work with me. So that began another process. And of course, hanging out with Dorothy, I got to ask all the questions I ever wanted to ask about the founders, about her work, about the Devas and the angels, and her relationship with Rock and what he was really like. And, all of the early days, I got to hear direct from somebody who was in the thick of it all. And that gave me confidence to kind of come forward with my own experience of those inner worlds. And so I began to do that. So I was very blessed to have her as a mentor and a friend and a colleague. And it just kind of grew from there. And we started traveling toward the end of her years. She couldn't travel on her own anymore. So I would go with her.
Mm.
And we would teach together and do presentations and things. And it just kind of grew from there.
Mm.
And then I started going to Brazil and started having amazing experiences with particularly the trees, because the trees in the Southern Hemisphere are very different
Mm.
than the trees that I grew up in Canada. And it just grew from there. And finally, somebody who I know in Brazil, who's a game colleague,
Yes. Our
uh,
publisher, our transformation
publisher,
game
our
publisher.
translator, our organizer, good old,
Yeah.
wonderful Olga. She just said, Jude, you've got to put them together and put them in a book, all these messages that you get. So with a lot of, from her,
Uh-huh.
I finally did that. And then it was her publishing company that actually sponsored the publication of the book. So
Beautiful, Judy.
I
So
don't know what else to
how
say.
do you experience your connection? I mean, what
For me,
is it, a sense, or how does it arise in you?
There's a couple of signals that I've learned to recognize. So there's a felt sense in my body that's consistent. It has to do with a certain kind of vibrational sense in my body. And then there's a tone to it that comes as well, and the tone is always some version of joy or love or a feeling of being nurtured, a sense of being nurtured. And then there are impressions that come in, and I would describe it as telepathic, I guess, is the best thing, because it's like something arrives and it's whole. It's like when you get an idea for something, it arrives, and then I have to unwrap it and unfold it and clothe it with words, and give it language. So I don't see anything. I very, very rarely hear anything. It's a much more intuitive or telepathic kind of connection. But there are signals that I can recognize that I've learned to trust, and that I've learned are, if the signals aren't there, I would question what it is I'm connecting to or listening to or being with. Yeah. And sometimes there's ideas and conversation that goes on, and other times it's just kind of blending in a field of energy that is, I would wish it for everyone. I would so wish that every single human being could experience it, because it's, there aren't words. Words are incredibly inadequate to try and describe it, you know. But I think once people touch it, it provides a lot of motivation for carrying on and doing the work of actually building the connections, or having it be a more disciplined, less haphazard experience. Yeah.
So is there particular practices you do, or what encourages you to continue to build this energetic inside you, this alignment that you're expressing to us, that one, brought you here, and two, took you through, years and years here, and is flowering through a book and through the continuation of the work with the game, and Dorothy, and bringing her work more to the public?
I think it has some, this may sound trite, but it's because I actually believe it makes a difference. That it is making a contribution to seeding or nurturing a different attitude to nature, a different attitude to the perception of the subtle worlds, it's changing, it's contributing to a change of relationship between us human beings and everything else that is part of the life of the planet, whether we can see it or not see it, whether it's physical life or non-physical life. I see the world very differently when I'm being attentive to that part of myself. The world looks different. My ability to keep it simple and still have a profound sense of joy or satisfaction or belonging. I mean, that's part of it, is the feeling of belonging that comes from the knowing of belonging, that comes from connecting and engaging with those worlds. It's like I can't doubt that I belong in this world, that that I'm part of this web. I'm not separate from it. I'm not different from it. I'm an integral part of it, and I have a role to play. There's something that, because I'm human, I can do. That's part of how we unfold.
So it's very and
map a future. You know, how do we map a future? For me, that's it. This work gives me hope.
Okay.
The whole thing of co-creation and the intelligence of nature, it gives me hope that we can still find solutions. We can still find ways to respond to what's going on in the world.
So, Judy, that's a great segue to ask you the question of Findhorn's part in the world today and how you would see it as framed up in a great hope, if it is for you.
Well, it must be, or I wouldn't still.
Yes.
After 40 years, I'd be somewhere else, I guess.
Yeah.
I still go back to, I guess, the things that I understood at the very beginning or in the early days. That part of our role here, part of our mission, our vision, whatever, was to seed into human consciousness some new attitudes and to make those attitudes more prevalent in the world. And you know, there's lots of ways we can do that. We do that with, you know, with what we've built here that inspires people. We do that with the way that we try to live together. We do that with the energy that we create that can then kind of move out, you know, the whole idea of the lighthouse. But it's, for me, it's not just the light, it's also, you know, all those really subtle energies that get built here. The field of energy that gets built here that then can, the energy can act like the imaginal cells in the chrysalis of a butterfly. You know, it just moves out into that network of light, or it moves out into that web that holds the earth. And we don't always know where it goes. And sometimes we hear about it years afterward, where it went. The workshops, the tours, the films that people see, the books, whatever it is that takes the energy out.
So corresponding, that's the films, the books, the experiences on the sort of five senses level that responds to something deeper in us. But you're also talking about some sort of a ripple effect, of frequency.
Absolutely.
A frequency that is close to the way you're working with the collective.
You know, that's what I mean. It's like there's an energetic or a frequency lighthouse as well.
Yeah, right. There you go.
The metaphor, if you transfer it from the physical into the non-physical, there's, you know, and that, you know, over the years has gone through cycles as well in terms of its strength. and what was being sent out into the world. But I still think that that's one of the reasons, still one of our biggest gifts, is to do that work and to seed energetically as well as physically some new ideas, some new thinking, some new attitudes, some different kinds of approaches, some models that provide alternatives. There's other ways to do things than some of the dominant.
So in some ways,
patterns.
So Judy, through this discussion, I can't help but feel that some of the things that you've talked about are actually your part here of holding that frequency within the foundation, as well as holding it as something that goes out in our lighthouse frequency, and that was accountability, responsibility, and alignment as being something very close to your spiritual function within the circuitry of this spiritual network.
Interesting perspective, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that on board and see.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just, it's like I was just seeing what drew you here, how you performed here, what your functionality as a focalizer was, and that you continue to do that. And I do see that. I witness that in the work that you, and the trainings you do, and the workshops you lead. And I just, I have a lot of gratitude for your presence and the continuation of our friendship and collaboration that happens. So
Thank you, Kathy.
thank you for joining us, Judy. And I'm sure your book is available online if people search. So let's just say the name of it again is Forest Voices
When
When
Nature
Nature Speaks. Judy, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us on Facebook Live and Findhorn Live. And have a good evening or day, depending on when and where you're listening. And join us again for our sanctuaries. And please have a look at the website for Roots of Tomorrow, which is a 3-day summit that is coming up here pretty quick. It's online, and it's the first of probably many that we'll do, I hope, but it's the first, and we'll see how it goes. And it's going to focus each day on one of the principles that Findhorn, that, as Judy was saying, is the glue that actually holds the foundation together all these years. So please have a look for that. Also on our website, you might see a donation button, and if you feel inclined, it would be very much appreciated, especially in these times when our workshops are not happening on site. And we welcome you to join us in the many Voices of Findhorn and the other ways that our online programs reach out to invite you to Findhorn through the airwaves. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, everyone.
Kathy. Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.